I tried focusing on abundance for 30 days, and here's what happened. Imagine waking up tomorrow and realizing that the only thing standing between the life you have and the life you know you're meant to live is the way you've been thinking. Not your job, not your circumstances, not your past, but the thoughts you choose every single day. I know it sounds simple, but over the next hour, I'm going to show you exactly what happened when I committed myself, fully, honestly, intensely, to one single mental shift, focusing on abundance for 30 straight days. No excuses, no breaks, no "I'll try again tomorrow." Just a real, raw, disciplined experiment with one goal: to see if abundance thinking could truly reshape my reality. And I'll tell you right now, what happened shocked me. It wasn't just mindset changes. It was money, opportunities, synchronicities, and emotional clarity that I hadn't experienced in years. This is not a "think positive and magically become rich" video. This is a grounded, modern, practical journey that blends mindset, neuroscience, manifestation, and success psychology. The same principles used by real-world millionaires, high performers, visionary founders like Oprah, Jim Carrey, Jeff Bezos, Steve Harvey, and countless others who built their wealth from the inside out. Today, I'm bringing you behind the curtain. I'm sharing the wins, the failures, the surprising breakthroughs, and the exact shifts that turned 30 days into a life-changing awakening. So, sit down, breathe, open your mind, and let's begin this journey together. Because once you understand what abundance truly is, not the cliche, not the Instagram quote, but the lived experience, everything in your life starts moving differently. Topic 1. The moment everything shifted. When I decided to spend 30 days focusing on abundance, I honestly thought it would be like every other mindset challenge you see online. You know the type: feel good for a week, journal a little, say a few affirmations, then slowly forget about it as life pulls you back into old habits. But something inside me was tired of repeating the same cycles and calling it growth. I wanted proof, real proof. I wanted to see, visibly, measurably, whether changing the way I think could actually change the way I live. And that desire for evidence was the exact moment the shift began. Because abundance is not something that shows up after you believe in it. Abundance shows up the second you decide to practice it. And practice is exactly where this journey started. On the first day, I noticed how automatic scarcity thinking had become in my life. It was in the way I looked at my bank account, in the way I reacted to bills, in the way I planned my future, even in the way I talked to myself. Scarcity was the default setting, and I didn't even realize it. I kept expecting lack, preparing for disappointment, rehearsing failure in my mind long before anything happened in reality. And I thought to myself, if the mind creates patterns based on repetition, what patterns have I been repeating without noticing? What future have I been rehearsing every day without meaning to create it? That was when it hit me. Abundance isn't something you add to your life. It's something you uncover by noticing the scarcity you've been swimming in. So, I made a promise to myself. For 30 days, every time I caught a scarcity thought, I would replace it. Not with blind positivity, but with a conscious, grounded, powerful abundance statement. If my mind said, "there's not enough," I responded with, "there is always a way." If it said, "what if it goes wrong?" I replaced it with, "what if it goes right in ways I can't even imagine yet?" If it whispered, "you don't deserve more," I countered with, "my potential has no ceiling." I wasn't trying to trick myself. I was trying to rewire myself. And slowly, I began to see how deeply wired I had been for survival instead of creation. By day 3, something shifted. I woke up calmer. Not dramatically, not magically, but noticeably. It felt like the constant mental noise had decreased by just one volume level. And in that silence, there was space. Space to think, space to observe, space to imagine something better. That morning, I remembered something Steve Harvey once said: "You can't outwork a bad mindset." He wasn't talking about being lazy. He meant that no level of effort can compensate for the internal limitations you secretly hold. As I repeated that sentence to myself, I understood why abundance thinking is the starting point of every success story we admire. On day 5, I had my first real test. A financial issue popped up unexpectedly, The kind of thing that normally triggers stress, fear, or that old feeling of, here we go again. But this time, instead of spiraling, I paused. I reminded myself that abundance thinking isn't about pretending everything is perfect. It's about believing deeply that solutions exist even when you haven't found them yet. I breathed, stayed grounded, stayed open. And what happened next truly surprised me. Within a few hours, a solution appeared. Not because the universe magically dropped it into my lap, but because my mind was clear enough to notice an option I had previously ignored. When you think in scarcity, every problem feels like a wall. When you think in abundance, every problem becomes a door. Around day 7, synchronicities began showing up. Small things at first, unexpected messages, opportunities that seemed random but felt perfectly timed. A conversation with a friend that gave me clarity I'd been needing for months. A work idea that suddenly clicked after weeks of feeling stuck. It was like invisible pieces of my life were quietly rearranging themselves. And it reminded me of something Oprah often says. What you focus on expands. It's not magic, it's psychology. Your brain filters reality based on what it believes is important. And for the first time in a long time, I was telling my brain that growth, opportunities, solutions, and prosperity were important. By day 10, I felt different. Not like a new person, but like the real version of myself was finally waking up. I felt lighter, more present, more intentional. My thoughts weren't running on autopilot anymore. I wasn't obsessing over worst-case scenarios. I wasn't shrinking myself to avoid disappointment. Instead, I began imagining things I had stopped believing were possible. I began wanting more again, but wanting from a place of expansion, not desperation. There's a huge difference between saying, I want more because I'm lacking, and I want more because I'm growing. And that difference became one of the biggest revelations of this journey. The truth is, most people think abundance is about money. Yes, money is part of it, but abundance is much bigger. It's about emotional clarity. It's about mental freedom. It's about having choices instead of limits. It's about trusting your future instead of fearing it. It's about understanding on a deep cellular level that you are not defined by your past or your circumstances. You are defined by your ability to create. And for the first time in years, I was creating from a place of power instead of panic. The more I practiced abundance thinking, the more I began noticing how successful people live in this mindset naturally. Millionaires like Jeff Bezos didn't build Amazon because they feared failure. They built it because they saw possibility where others saw risk. Oprah didn't become Oprah by thinking small. She became Oprah by expanding her vision beyond anything her past told her was realistic. Jim Carrey didn't write himself a $10 million check because he was delusional. He wrote it because he knew that imagination is the blueprint of reality. These people don't hope for abundance. They think abundantly as a normal state of being. And I realized I had been trying to create a successful life with a mindset that wasn't designed for success. By the end of the first week, I understood something profound. Abundance isn't something you achieve after you become successful. Abundance is the mindset that creates success. It's the foundation, the engine, the oxygen. And once I understood that, everything, my choices, my emotions, my reactions, my energy, began shifting toward a higher level of clarity and possibility. And this was only the beginning. Topic 2. Rewiring the inner dialogue that shapes your reality. By the time I reached the second week of focusing on abundance, something unexpected and honestly a little uncomfortable began to happen. I started hearing my own thoughts with a level of clarity I'd never experienced before. It was almost as if I had turned the volume up on my internal dialogue, and for the first time I could actually differentiate between the voice that belonged to me and the voice that belonged to old fears, old beliefs, old versions of myself that I didn't even relate to anymore. It was strange, almost surreal, because I realized that most of my life had been guided not by my intentions, but by habits of thought I never chose consciously. And as I listened, really listened, I understood something powerful. Abundance is not just what you think, it's how you talk to yourself when no one else is listening. I started noticing how often I would unconsciously question my own potential. I'd think of an idea and immediately doubt its value. I'd imagine a goal and instantly shrink it down to something more realistic. Even when I felt motivated, there was always a quiet whisper of uncertainty in the background, like a mental anchor holding me down. This voice wasn't dramatic or loud. It was subtle, invisible, and that made it even more dangerous. It was the accumulated voice of past disappointments, of other people's opinions, of society's limitations, of childhood programming. It wasn't me, but I had been letting it narrate my life for years. That week, I had a realization that hit me harder than anything else. If you don't take control of your inner dialogue takes control of you. And most people never question it. They never ask, is this belief mine? Did I choose this thought? Or did I just inherit it from my environment? It reminded me of something Warren Buffett once said. The chains of habit are too light to be felt until they are too heavy to be broken. I realized my mindset had been shaped not by conscious choice, but by unconscious repetition. As I continued with the challenge, I began treating my thoughts like data, not truth, not identity, just information. And in that shift, I discovered one of the most important principles of abundance. You are not obligated to believe every thought that appears in your mind. You can choose which thoughts to energize and which thoughts to release. You can redirect your mental focus the same way an athlete trains a muscle. And that's exactly what I started doing. Whenever a scarcity thought appeared, those familiar, "What if it fails?" or "Who do you think you are?" or "That's too big for someone like you," I didn't fight it. I didn't suppress it. I simply acknowledged it and replaced it with a powerful, abundant alternative. And the more I practiced this mental substitution, the more natural it became. It was like upgrading the operating system of my mind. The old software was still trying to run in the background, but the new system was stronger, cleaner, more aligned with who I was becoming. One of the moments that really changed me happened around day 12. I was journaling about a goal I had postponed for years, something I secretly wanted, but always told myself the timing wasn't right, or I didn't know enough yet. As I wrote, a sentence flowed out of me that stopped me cold. The only thing I'm waiting for is permission I don't actually need. I stared at those words for a long time. They felt like a punch in the chest. I realized I had been seeking external validation for dreams that only required internal permission. I was waiting for confidence to appear in my life instead of generating it from within. Confidence is not a personality trait. It's a byproduct of repeated self-trust. And abundance is the mindset that fuels that trust. This is when I started connecting the dots between abundance thinking and real-world success stories. People like Elon Musk, Sara Blakely, Steve Jobs, Oprah, none of them waited to feel ready. None of them waited for the world to agree with their vision. They believed in abundance, even when there was no evidence yet. Sara Blakely talks openly about how her parents encouraged her to fail and to see mistakes as expansion. Elon Musk bet almost everything on ideas people called insane. Oprah had every reason to think small based on her past, but she refused to let old conditions define her future. These people didn't think abundantly because they were successful. They became successful because they thought abundantly before anyone else believed it was possible. Around day 14, my emotional reactions began shifting too. I noticed I was judging myself less harshly. My self-talk became more supportive, more empowering, more intentional. And that emotional shift created something extraordinary: momentum. Not external momentum, but internal momentum. The kind of momentum that makes you wake up excited again. The kind of momentum that makes you feel like the world is opening up for you instead of closing in around you. The kind of momentum that makes taking action feel effortless instead of forced. I realized that abundance is not a mindset you turn on once a day. It's a way of relating to yourself. It's showing up for your dreams with the same energy you show up for your fears. It's speaking to yourself the way a mentor speaks to the person they believe in. And that shift alone began transforming how I lived my day-to-day life. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was responding. I wasn't doubting anymore. I was deciding. I wasn't shrinking anymore. I was expanding. One night during that second week, I watched an interview with Jeff Bezos, where he said something that aligned perfectly with my journey. You don't choose your passions choose you. And it made me wonder, how many passions had I ignored because I believed scarcity more than I believed myself? How many opportunities had I let pass by because my inner dialogue convinced me I wasn't capable yet? How many dreams did I delay because I was waiting for a version of myself that only abundance could create? That night, I realized something profound. Abundance doesn't show up in your life when you achieve success. Abundance shows up when you finally decide to believe in the possibility of success. And that belief begins with the words you say to yourself in the quiet moments when no one else is around. As week 2 came to an end, I felt lighter, stronger, more aligned. Not because my circumstances had changed drastically, but because I had changed drastically. I was no longer navigating life with a mind wired for lack. I was becoming someone who expected growth, who trusted the process, who acted with intention instead of fear. And that inner transformation would soon start creating external results that even I did not expect. Topic 3. The Science of Abundance. Training your brain to expect success. By the 3rd week of this journey, something remarkable began to unfold. Something far deeper than a mindset shift. Something almost biological. I started noticing my brain reacting differently to everyday situations, as if it was slowly being rewired. It wasn't just emotional clarity anymore. It was mental adaptation. And at that moment, I understood something I had read many times but never truly grasped until I lived it. Abundance isn't just a belief. It's a neurological state. When you focus on abundance long enough, the brain begins forming new neural pathways, strengthening new patterns, and weakening old limitations. You're not just changing your thoughts, you're changing the physical structure of your mind. This realization hit me unexpectedly. I was standing in line to buy coffee, and the line was slow, the kind of situation that usually irritates people. But for the first time in a very long time, I felt completely calm. Not because I was forcing myself to be positive, but because I genuinely didn't feel rushed or stressed. My mind wasn't racing with scarcity thoughts like, I'm wasting time, I'm falling behind, or I need to hurry. I was simply present, fully present. And that presence felt like a luxury I didn't even realize I had been missing. That moment made me reflect on a concept from neuroscience called the reticular activating system, or RAS. It's the part of your brain that filters information and decides what you notice. When you're in scarcity, your RAS filters for problems, dangers, and limitations. But when you intentionally shift your focus to abundance, your RAS starts highlighting opportunities, solutions, synchronicities, and possibilities you never saw before. And suddenly, I understood why so many successful people swear by visualization, gratitude, and intention setting. These aren't spiritual cliches. They are neurological training techniques. They teach your brain to look for abundance. And when the brain looks for something consistently, it finds it. As the days passed, I noticed that my creativity skyrocketed. Ideas came faster. Problem-solving became easier. My intuition felt sharper. I wasn't overthinking everything the way I used to. It was as if my brain was finally working with me instead of against me. And I remembered a quote from Steve Jobs that now made perfect sense. Your intuition already knows what you truly want to become. But intuition can't speak clearly when the mind is cluttered with scarcity. Abundance clears the fog. It amplifies the inner voice that always knew the path. It reveals the next step, not through force, but through alignment. Somewhere around day 18, something happened that I still think about to this day. I was working on a project that I'd been struggling with for months, something that felt heavy and complicated. Suddenly, in the middle of the work, a clear solution came to me. Not just a small answer, but the exact strategy I needed in full detail. It felt almost like downloading information. But I realized it wasn't magic. It was the result of a calm, abundant mind. When the mind is not trapped in fear, it becomes a channel for creativity. When the mind is not scanning for danger, it scans for improvement. When the mind is not focused on what could go wrong, it begins seeing new ways the future can go right. This is the mindset that every major innovator in history taps into. Think of Jeff Bezos building Amazon when most people didn't even understand what the internet could become. Think of Sara Blakely reinventing an entire industry with Spanx, even though she had no experience in fashion manufacturing. Think of Elon Musk launching companies in sectors he didn't originally master, software, cars, rockets, because his mind wasn't trained to ask, what if it fails? His mind was trained to ask, how can it work? That question alone is one of the clearest markers of an abundant brain. The more I focused on abundance, the more I realized that the world doesn't reward people who think small. It doesn't reward people who play it safe. who cling to the familiar, who repeat the same mental patterns expecting a different life. The world rewards people who think expansively, who dare to dream without apologizing, who expect good things to happen even before they have proof. And suddenly I understood why the wealthiest individuals are often the most optimistic. It's not naive optimism, it's strategic optimism. It's training the brain to believe there is always a path to growth, even when the path is not visible yet. During that third week, I also began noticing how abundance affects emotional resilience. When something went wrong, I didn't collapse the way I used to. I didn't interpret setbacks as signs that I wasn't good enough or that life was working against me. Instead, I noticed I began asking better questions. Questions like, what is this teaching me? How can this redirect benefit me? What new solution can come from this? These weren't things I forced myself to say. They became my instinctive reactions. Abundance had rewired not just my thoughts, but my emotional responses. There was one particular evening I'll never forget. I had a frustrating day. Delays, small setbacks, unexpected changes. The kind of day that usually drains your energy. But instead of feeling defeated, I felt strangely empowered. I remember sitting on my couch and realizing something huge. I was no longer afraid of challenges. I wasn't interpreting obstacles as stop signs, but as invitations to think differently. Scarcity interprets difficulty as a threat. Abundance interprets difficulty as growth in disguise. And right there, in that quiet moment, I felt a wave of gratitude. Not just gratitude for the good, but gratitude for the hard parts too. Because I finally understood they were shaping me for something bigger. At this stage of the journey, I began waking up with a sense of anticipation. Not anxiety, not pressure. Anticipation. Abundance creates that feeling. It makes you excited to see what the day brings because you begin believing, deeply, that something good is always moving toward you. You begin trusting the timing of your life. You begin feeling aligned with opportunities instead of disconnected from them. And as this feeling grew, I started noticing a pattern. The more I expected good things, the more good things happened. Tiny situations at first, then bigger ones. I remembered reading a study once that said the brain releases different chemicals depending on what you expect. Expect stress, and your brain floods your body with cortisol. Expect danger, and your brain activates your fight or flight response. But expect possibility, and your brain releases dopamine, the chemical of motivation, clarity, and openness. And suddenly, I understood why abundance felt so powerful. It wasn't just mental or emotional, it was physical. My body was literally aligning with what my mind was choosing to focus on. By the end of week 3, I felt like a different person. My brain felt different, my energy felt different, my perspective felt different, and one thought became absolutely clear. Scarcity had been limiting my life more than any external circumstance ever had. Scarcity was the invisible cage, abundance was the key, and unlocking that key was only the beginning of what would unfold next. Topic 4. When the external world starts responding to your internal shift. By the 4th week of this experiment, something fascinating began to happen. Something that proved, beyond theory, beyond philosophy, beyond inspiration, that abundance is not just an inner experience. It's a signal, a frequency, a magnetic field that quietly changes the way the world responds to you. I didn't expect this part. Honestly, I thought the transformation would stay mostly internal. I believed I'd feel calmer, more hopeful, more focused. But what I didn't anticipate was how quickly the external world would start rearranging itself the moment my internal energy shifted. It started in small ways, the kinds of things most people would call coincidence. An unexpected email, a person I hadn't spoken to in years reaching out with an opportunity, a project I thought was lost suddenly coming back to life. Tiny things, but they repeated so consistently that I couldn't ignore the pattern. It was as if the universe had been waiting for me to stop broadcasting scarcity long enough to finally send me what I had been asking for all along. I remember one morning, around day 22, when I woke up with a sense of clarity so sharp it felt like my mind had been rebooted overnight. I wasn't rushing, I wasn't stressed, I wasn't thinking about what could go wrong. I felt aligned, and that morning, something incredible happened. I received a call, the exact kind of call I had been wanting for months. One that could shift my financial situation and open doors I had been trying to force open for far too long. And instead of panicking or doubting myself, I simply thought, of course this is happening. This is what abundance feels like. It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't entitlement. It was alignment, the quiet confidence that comes from finally being in sync with the life you're trying to build. That experience made me think deeply about the idea of energetic congruence. It's the gap between who you say you want to be and who you show up as every day. When that gap is large, life feels hard. Opportunities slip through your fingers, doors close. But when that gap begins to close, when your thoughts, emotions, actions, and expectations line up, reality shifts with you. Abundance thinking closes that gap. It makes you act from the identity you want instead of the identity you fear. And this reminded me of something Oprah once said in an interview. You don't become what you want, you become what you believe. Hearing that years ago felt inspirational, but living it during these 30 days made it real. Because I realized that wanting abundance achieves nothing if you secretly believe that abundance isn't meant for you. But the moment you genuinely believe it, not intellectually, but emotionally, energetically, the world begins treating you like someone who deserves more. I also noticed that people around me responded differently. My conversations were deeper, my interactions felt more open, I communicated with more clarity, more confidence, more calmness. It was as if my energy had softened in some places and strengthened in others. I didn't feel the need to prove anything or defend myself, and that emotional balance changed the dynamic of everything, from work to friendships to random daily encounters. Around day 25, I had a moment that crystallized this shift. I was walking outside, thinking about the journey so far, when a thought appeared in my mind with such clarity that I physically stopped walking. The thought was simple, but profound. Your external reality is just a mirror of how safe you feel receiving more. I had never considered that before, not consciously, but it suddenly made perfect sense. Scarcity creates a sense of unsafety, a belief that more is dangerous, impossible, unrealistic, out of reach. Abundance creates the opposite, a sense that more is natural, available, aligned with your growth. For the first time in my life, I felt safe wanting more, safe dreaming bigger, safe receiving opportunities without sabotaging them, safe believing that I was capable. And the moment that emotional safety arrived, opportunities began to accelerate. This shift reminded me of Jeff Bezos in the early days of Amazon. People assume he built Amazon because he took massive risks. But the truth is, Bezos wasn't driven by fear. He was driven by clarity, by the genuine belief that the internet was expanding and that opportunities were infinite. His decisions weren't made from desperation. They were made from abundance. That internal safety allowed him to think long-term, to innovate boldly, to move calmly even when others panicked. And that's exactly what abundance does. It expands your time horizon. It gives you the emotional space to think strategically instead of react impulsively. During this 4th week, something else happened. I began noticing how my perception of problems changed. Things that used to feel overwhelming now felt manageable. Not because they got smaller, but because I got bigger. My perspective expanded. My resilience deepened. The same issues that once triggered fear now activated a sense of curiosity. I found myself asking questions like, what else is possible here? Or, how can this become an advantage? Instead of the old scarcity questions like, why is this happening to me? Or, what if everything falls apart? And as this inner dialogue softened, the outer world softened with it. Deadlines became negotiable. Conflicts became opportunities for clarity. Unexpected events became lessons instead of threats. It was one of the most surprising and empowering sensations of the entire journey. Realizing that abundance doesn't eliminate challenges, it transforms your relationship with them. One evening, around day 27, I sat quietly reflecting on everything that had shifted. And I realized something that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. Abundance isn't about getting more. It's about becoming more. Because when you become more, calmer, clearer, stronger, more aligned, life naturally gives you more to match who you've become. By the end of the 4th week, I felt like I was living in a different timeline. Not because everything magically changed overnight, but because my energy stopped fighting life and started partnering with it. The inner resistance dissolved, the mental clutter faded, and the world responded with synchronicities I could no longer dismiss as coincidence. This was the moment I understood, without any doubt, that abundance is not a reward for positive thinking. It is the natural outcome of internal alignment. And once you reach that alignment, the universe seems almost eager to meet you halfway. Topic 5. The hidden barriers you don't know you have. As I entered the 5th stage of this 30-day journey, something unexpected surfaced. Something deeper than mindset, deeper than habit, deeper than thought patterns. It was the quiet, invisible layer beneath all of it, the hidden internal barriers I didn't even know I had. And the moment I became aware of them, everything suddenly made sense. Every financial plateau, every repeated emotional pattern, every goal that always seemed almost possible but never fully manifested. It became obvious that abundance wasn't just about thinking differently. It was about uncovering and dissolving the invisible limitations I had unknowingly carried for years. The discovery began subtly. I realized that as my mindset shifted toward abundance, some emotions started rising that I didn't expect. Guilt, hesitation, resistance. It was confusing at first. Why would someone feel guilty for wanting a better life? Why would there be resistance to receiving more money, more peace, more freedom? But as I explored these feelings, I understood that scarcity doesn't just live in your mind. It lives in your nervous system, in your memories, in the emotional imprint of past experiences. One afternoon, around day 28, I had a moment of profound clarity. I was reflecting on the new opportunities that had begun appearing in my life, the ones that felt like direct responses to my internal shift. And suddenly, without warning, an uncomfortable thought surfaced. Do I really deserve all of this? It was so quiet, so fast, that if I hadn't been paying close attention, I would have missed it. But it was there, a whisper from an old version of myself that didn't feel worthy of abundance. A version shaped by years of self-comparison, self-doubt, and environments where playing small was normal. That moment shocked me. I always believed I wanted more success, more freedom, more financial stability. But deep inside, hidden behind layers of ambition, there was a belief that receiving too much would make me stand out, make people judge me, make me seem arrogant, or make me lose the approval I'd unconsciously relied on. I suddenly understood what so many millionaires talk about, the internal ceiling. The point where your mind says you want more, but your emotional system says, this is as far as you're allowed to go. And until you raise that internal ceiling, abundance will always feel like a fight. I thought of something Sara Blakely shared during an interview, something that felt incredibly relevant in that moment. She said that her biggest breakthrough wasn't creating Spanx. It was realizing she had internalized the belief that women shouldn't make too much money, shouldn't be too confident, shouldn't take up too much space. Once she recognized that belief as borrowed, not chosen, her entire identity shifted. And that shift turned her into the youngest self-made female billionaire in history. She didn't become abundant because she built a company. She built a company because she became abundant. Inspired by that reflection, I decided to sit with the discomfort instead of running from it. I began asking myself questions I'd avoided for years. Why did I feel unworthy of receiving more? Why did success sometimes scare me as much as failure? Why did I feel safer dreaming small? And what I uncovered was both painful and liberating. Many of my limitations weren't mine. They were inherited from family patterns, from society's expectations, from personal experiences where risk led to disappointment. These emotional imprints created the internal rulebook I had been living by. And once I saw the rules, I realized I could rewrite them. That week, I spent time reflecting on something Oprah said in one of her most iconic speeches. You are responsible for the energy you bring into your life. And I finally understood what she meant. Because the energy you bring into your life is shaped by what you believe you deserve. The world can offer you opportunities, but if your internal self-image is still wired for scarcity, you'll reject them, consciously or unconsciously. You'll downplay your ideas. You'll hold yourself back. You'll procrastinate, not because you're lazy, but because part of you is afraid of expanding beyond what feels emotionally safe. As the days passed, I realized that abundance requires emotional courage. True abundance asks you to expand your identity. It asks you to release the version of yourself who survived through limitations. And that's not easy. We often cling to familiar struggle because it's predictable. Abundance is unfamiliar, unpredictable, limitless, And the mind interprets that limitlessness as danger until you train it otherwise. One evening, I found myself thinking about Jeff Bezos again, not the billionaire, but the young man who left a stable job to build something that didn't exist yet. Everyone talks about the risk he took, but what most people overlook is the internal risk. Bezos had to expand his identity before he expanded his company. He had to see himself as someone capable of building something massive. He had to believe he was worthy of success larger than anything he had been taught to expect. And that internal shift is what allowed Amazon to evolve from a simple idea into a global empire. During the 5th stage of my journey, I began rewriting my own identity. Every day, I reminded myself, I am allowed to receive. I am allowed to succeed. I am allowed to expand. I am allowed to be more than my past. And those simple sentences began dissolving years of emotional conditioning. I felt lighter, more grounded, more connected to my potential. Abundance wasn't just a concept anymore. It was becoming my default emotional state. And as these hidden barriers began melting away, I noticed something extraordinary. My decisions became bolder. My communication became clearer. My boundaries became stronger. My creativity expanded. I started acting like someone who believed in their future, not someone afraid of repeating their past. And that shift alone created a ripple effect in every part of my life. Because when your identity expands, your life expands with it. At the end of this 5th stage, I understood something that changed everything. The limit is never the goal. The limit is the identity you haven't upgraded yet. Once your identity grows, the goal becomes inevitable. And for the first time, abundance didn't feel like something I was reaching for. It felt like something I was finally stepping into. Topic 6. When abundance becomes your new normal. By the 6th stage of this 30-day journey, something profound began to settle in. Something subtle but incredibly powerful. Abundance stopped feeling like a practice, a challenge, or an experiment. It started feeling normal, natural, familiar, as if I had finally returned to a version of myself that had always existed beneath the noise, beneath the fear, beneath the excuses and insecurities and quiet self-doubt. It was as though abundance wasn't something I was learning, but something I was remembering. There's a moment in every transformation where the new pattern becomes stronger than the old one, where the scale shifts from intention to instinct. And that's exactly what happened during this phase. I noticed it one morning when I woke up, and without thinking, my first thought wasn't stress or worry or a mental checklist of tasks. It was gratitude. Not the forced kind, not the write 3 things in a notebook kind. It was a deep, spontaneous feeling that filled my mind before I even opened my eyes. For the first time, abundance wasn't an idea. It was my default emotional state. This shift made me think about something Tony Robbins once said: "You get what you tolerate." At first, that statement sounds harsh, but living through this process made me realize the truth behind it. I had tolerated scarcity thinking for so long that it became normal. I had tolerated negative self-talk, tolerated emotional exhaustion, tolerated believing in my potential only halfway. And when you tolerate something long enough, the mind stops questioning it. But the moment you raise your standards, the moment you decide that abundance is your new baseline, life reorganizes itself around that decision. During this stage, I noticed how quickly my brain began rejecting thoughts that didn't match the new identity I was stepping into. When a scarcity thought appeared, it felt foreign, almost intrusive. Instead of believing it, I questioned it. Instead of absorbing it, I dismissed it. It reminded me of how the immune system reacts to an unfamiliar virus. Abundance became my psychological immunity. Scarcity tried to enter, but it no longer had the authority to stay. One of the clearest signs of this shift happened around day 31, even though the challenge wasn't technically over yet. I received a piece of news that would normally trigger anxiety, a sudden financial decision I had to make. And instead of spiraling into fear, something unexpected happened. I felt calm, steady, clear-headed. I understood the situation logically, but I didn't feel emotionally hijacked by it. My mind went straight into solution mode. Not frantic problem-solving, but strategic, grounded decision-making. It was a moment of undeniable proof. Abundance had become my conditioning. At this point in the journey, I also started noticing something interesting about time. When I lived in scarcity, my days always felt rushed. There was never enough time, never enough energy, never enough progress. Scarcity shrinks your perception of time. It makes everything feel urgent, chaotic, overwhelming. But abundance does the opposite. It expands your sense of time. It makes you feel present, capable, intentional. I no longer felt like I was racing against my own life. I felt like I was in partnership with it. This shift in timing reminded me of how successful entrepreneurs talk about their journey. People often assume millionaires are stressed because they have so many responsibilities. But in reality, many of them, Oprah, Bezos, Richard Branson, talk about feeling calmer, not more chaotic, as their responsibilities grew. Why? Because abundance expands your capacity. It gives you more emotional bandwidth. It allows you to make big decisions without the small anxieties that once consumed you. When abundance becomes your normal, your life stops feeling like a fire to extinguish and starts feeling like a strategy to execute. Another powerful transformation during this stage was how I responded to opportunities. In the past, I had a habit of hesitating. I'd get an idea and sit on it. I'd receive an invitation and overthink it. I'd imagine a project and wait for the perfect moment, a moment that never arrived. But with abundance as my new baseline, hesitation quietly died. I found myself taking action quickly, intuitively, confidently, not recklessly, but decisively. Abundance removes the emotional weight that slows people down. You stop asking, "What if I fail?" and start asking, "What if this is the thing that changes everything?" This made me think of Sara Blakely again. She often talks about how she intentionally moves before she feels ready. She says the feeling of readiness is an illusion, and that abundance is what gives you the courage to act before confidence appears. Living through this sixth stage made her philosophy make perfect sense. I wasn't waiting for validation anymore. I wasn't waiting for the right mood, right circumstances, or right confidence level. My identity had expanded enough that taking action felt like the most natural thing in the world. During this stage, something else happened that truly surprised me. My environment began changing without me forcing it. Conversations that no longer aligned with my growth quietly faded. People who drained my energy naturally drifted. New connections started appearing. People with ambition, positivity, and alignment. It wasn't something I chose intentionally. It was something abundance attracted. I realized that abundance doesn't just change your inner world. It calibrates your outer world to match your new vibration. One evening during this sixth stage, I reflected deeply on everything that had changed. I realized that abundance had given me emotional authority over my life. I no longer reacted to every worry, every delay, every inconvenience. I no longer allowed external circumstances to dictate my internal state. It was like reclaiming a piece of myself I didn't know I had lost. Abundance restored my emotional sovereignty, and this brought me to one of the biggest insights of the entire journey. Abundance isn't about money. It's about internal power, the power to choose your thoughts, direct your emotions, design your reactions, and trust your path. When that becomes your new normal, money becomes a byproduct, not the goal. Success becomes a natural extension of who you are, not something you chase with exhaustion and fear. By the end of this stage, I felt deeply, unmistakably certain of something. Abundance wasn't an upgrade I added to my life. It was my original state, and everything I had been calling normal life before was just the noise covering it up. And once you experience abundance as your natural baseline, you will never again live the same way you lived before. Topic 7. The unexpected ways. Abundance changes your relationships. By the seventh stage of this journey, something surprising began unfolding. Something I didn't expect when I started focusing on abundance for 30 days. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about opportunities. It wasn't even about mindset. It was about people. My relationships, my interactions, my communication, the way I connected with others, everything began shifting. And I realized something profound. Abundance doesn't just change you. It changes the way you show up in every relationship you have. In fact, your relationships become one of the clearest mirrors of how deeply abundance has rooted itself in your identity. It happened slowly, almost invisibly at first. I started noticing that certain conversations drained me less. Conflicts that used to feel heavy suddenly felt manageable. I didn't take things personally the way I used to. I didn't over-explain myself. I didn't cling to approval. My boundaries became stronger, clearer, more natural. I wasn't pushing people away, but I also wasn't shrinking myself to fit into old dynamics. It was as if abundance gave me emotional oxygen, enough oxygen to breathe calmly, speak clearly, and show up authentically without fear of judgment. One powerful moment happened around day 32. I was talking to someone who usually triggered my insecurities, not intentionally, but through old patterns we had created years ago. Normally, I would have felt defensive. I would have second-guessed myself. But this time, something inside me stayed grounded. I didn't shrink. I didn't react emotionally. I felt steady. I realized abundance had changed not just my thoughts, but my emotional posture. I was no longer searching for validation from people who were never capable of giving it in the first place. I was validating myself from within. That moment reminded me of something Oprah once said. You teach people how to treat you by how you treat yourself. And I finally understood what she meant. When you're living in scarcity, emotionally, mentally, energetically, you often accept relationships that match that scarcity. You tolerate disrespect, inconsistency, lack of support. You accept the bare minimum because a part of you believes it's the best you'll get. But when abundance becomes your internal state, your tolerances change, your standards rise, not in a demanding way, but in a peaceful way. You no longer cling to relationships out of fear of losing something. You connect from a place of fullness rather than need. During this stage, I saw a pattern. Scarcity creates attachment, but abundance creates connection. In scarcity, you attach to people out of fear. Fear of being alone, fear of not finding better, fear of not being enough. In abundance, you connect from choice, not fear. You realize that you bring value to every interaction. You realize you don't need to chase affection or twist yourself into a version of someone you're not. Abundance teaches you that genuine connection can only happen when two people meet from a place of wholeness, not lack. Another powerful moment during this stage occurred during a conversation with a friend. We were discussing goals, dreams, future plans, topics that normally would have sparked my comparison mindset. But instead of feeling intimidated or inadequate, I felt inspired. Their success didn't trigger scarcity in me, it expanded me. I realized abundance had shifted my relationship with other people's wins. Instead of seeing them as reminders of what I didn't have, I saw them as proof of what was possible. It was like being part of a collective momentum rather than a personal competition. This shift reminded me of something I once heard Jeff Bezos say in an interview. People who are right a lot listen a lot. At first, I didn't understand the connection, but during this journey, it clicked. Scarcity makes you defensive, closed, reactive. You listen to reply. You listen to protect your ego. But abundance makes you open, curious, receptive. You listen to learn, to grow, to connect. And suddenly, every conversation becomes a portal to new insight instead of a battlefield for proving yourself. During this 7th stage, I also noticed how abundance softened my communication. I spoke with more kindness, more patience, more empathy. I no longer felt the need to dominate conversations or retreat when things felt uncomfortable. I communicated boundaries without guilt, expressed needs without feeling like a burden, and said no without apologizing for protecting my peace. This wasn't because I became a different person. It was because abundance removed the emotional weight that used to shape my reactions. One of the most emotional moments during this stage came late one night when I realized how much my relationships had been shaped by old versions of myself. Versions that felt unworthy, insecure, afraid to take up space. And as I sat there reflecting, a sentence came to me with so much clarity that it brought tears to my eyes. I have spent years connecting with people from a place of emptiness. Not because I wanted to, but because I didn't know any other way. And abundance finally taught me a new way. A way that didn't drain me, didn't disempower me, didn't disconnect me from myself. I realized something else. The quality of your relationships rises when the quality of your self-relationship rises. And abundance is the most powerful upgrade to your self-relationship you will ever experience. It teaches you to see your worth, to trust your intuition, to honor your boundaries, to stand in your truth without shrinking or bending. By the end of this 7th stage, something beautiful happened. I started attracting new people, aligned, positive, ambitious people. Conversations became deeper. Interactions felt meaningful. I wasn't performing. I was connecting. I wasn't hiding. I was expanding. It was as if abundance had recalibrated my entire social world to match the person I was becoming. And that brought me to one of the most profound realizations of this entire transformation. Abundance is contagious. When you embody it, people feel it. They respond to it. They rise with it. And the relationships that cannot rise with it naturally fall away. For the first time in my life, I was connecting with the world not from a place of seeking, but from a place of being. And that changed everything. Topic 8. The synchronicities that prove abundance is real. By the 8th stage of this 30-day journey, something happened that I still struggle to fully explain with logic alone. Something subtle, mysterious, almost magical, yet undeniably real. Synchronicities, perfectly timed events, unexpected alignments, solutions appearing out of nowhere, people showing up at the exact moment I needed them. It was as if life itself had started communicating with me, revealing a kind of invisible architecture behind reality that I had never noticed before. And the more I focused on abundance, the more frequent these synchronicities became. So frequent that calling them coincidence no longer made sense. It began with small things. A book recommendation that answered a question I had been struggling with for weeks, an email arriving minutes after I set an intention, a problem resolving itself without effort. But each time it happened, I felt a strange sensation deep inside, a recognition that this was not random. It felt intentional, deliberate, aligned, almost as if abundance wasn't just a mindset. It was a frequency, and the moment I tuned into it, the world started responding to me in a new way. One of the most powerful moments happened around day 33. I had been thinking about a creative project I wanted to start, but didn't know where to begin. I felt stuck, unsure of the first step. But I reminded myself of the new identity I was stepping into, the identity rooted in clarity, possibility, and trust. I let go of the need to control the how and focused on the why. And within 24 hours, I received a message from someone I hadn't spoken to in months, someone who happened to have expertise in exactly the area I needed help with. There was no way they could have known what I was thinking about. There was no way I could have predicted their timing. It was an alignment so precise that I had to pause and breathe through the shock. It felt like abundance whispering, "See? You're supported. You're guided. Keep going." This experience reminded me of something Oprah once said about intention. What you put out into the world is exactly what comes back to you. Most people hear that and think it's poetic. But when you live it, even briefly, you realize it's physics, it's energy, it's resonance. When your thoughts shift, your behavior shifts. When your behavior shifts, your energy shifts. And when your energy shifts, your life reorganizes itself to match the new frequency you're broadcasting. During this 8th stage, I also noticed a pattern that repeated over and over. Whenever I acted from abundance, calm, trust, expansion, solutions came easily. Whenever I slipped into scarcity, fear, urgency, doubt, things became chaotic or delayed. It was almost like the universe was mirroring my internal state back to me. Abundance aligned with flow, scarcity aligned with friction. And once I noticed this pattern, it became impossible to ignore. I remember another moment that deeply impacted me. I was having a conversation with a friend about timing, about how some things in life arrive too early or too late, and how frustrating that can be. And in the middle of the conversation, it hit me. Abundance teaches you that timing is not coincidence. Timing is communication. Every delay is protection. Every rejection is redirection. Every closed door is a bridge to a better one. And every aligned moment is evidence that your internal world is finally matching the external reality you're ready to experience. That insight reminded me of something Jeff Bezos said about decision-making. People assume success is about making perfect choices. But Bezos explained that success is about being aligned with the long-term flow of opportunities, noticing what others overlook, moving when others hesitate, trusting your instincts when others fear uncertainty. Synchronicities are often the subtle signals that show you where the flow is, and abundance helps you recognize those signals instead of missing them. During this 8th stage, I began waking up every day with a sense of anticipation, not anxiety, not pressure, but curiosity. I wanted to see what synchronicities the day would bring, and each day, without fail, something aligned. Sometimes small, sometimes massive, but always meaningful. A confirmation, a nudge, a sign. Abundance had become a dialogue between me and the universe. One evening during a quiet moment of reflection, I asked myself why this was happening. Why did synchronicities seem to accelerate the more abundant I became? And the answer came instantly, almost like it didn't come from my mind but through it. Because abundance removes resistance. Scarcity blocks blessings, not because the world withholds them, but because fear blinds you to them. Fear makes you overlook opportunities, dismiss ideas, ignore intuition, push away support. Abundance removes the blindfold. It aligns you with what was already trying to reach you. This realization made me emotional. I thought about all the years I spent waiting for signs, waiting for breakthroughs, waiting for something outside of me to change. But the whole time, the real shift needed to happen internally. I hadn't been waiting for synchronicities. Synchronicities had been waiting for me. During this 8th stage, I also noticed how much my intuition strengthened. Before this journey, intuition felt vague, abstract, unreliable. But with abundance as my new operating system, intuition became a guiding force. Clear, steady, precise. I could feel which decisions were aligned and which weren't. I could sense which opportunities were meant for me and which were distractions. I could tell when something felt expansive and when it felt restrictive. And every time I followed that intuitive feeling, the next step appeared almost effortlessly. One of the final synchronicities that sealed this stage happened late at night. I wrote down a question in my journal, something I didn't have an answer to yet. I closed the notebook, went to sleep, and the next morning, the answer appeared through a conversation, a video, and a random message, all within hours of each other. 3 signs, 3 confirmations, 1 answer. It felt like abundance itself saying, "Keep trusting. There is more for you." By the end of this 8th stage, I realized something that changed my understanding of life forever. Synchronicities are not random accidents. They are the language of an abundant universe communicating with an abundant mind. And once you learn to speak that language, life becomes a partnership instead of a struggle. And for the first time in my life, I understood that I was not walking this path alone. I was walking with life, and life was walking with me. Topic 9. The identity shift. Becoming the person. Abundance was waiting for. By the 9th stage of this journey, I realized something that changed everything. Something that was bigger than mindset, bigger than habits, bigger than synchronicities, bigger than any technique or practice. It was the truth at the core of real transformation. Abundance is not something you achieve. Abundance is someone you become. And this was the moment that the deepest shift unfolded. The moment where I stopped doing abundance and started being abundance. It didn't happen suddenly. It wasn't a dramatic revelation. It was a quiet, subtle awakening that grew stronger every day. I began to notice that the way I moved, the way I thought, the way I spoke, even the way I breathed had changed. It was as though a new identity had taken root inside me, one that wasn't weighed down by fear, scarcity, insecurity, or old emotional wounds, one that felt clearer, stronger, more grounded, more capable, one that believed in possibility by default. This identity shift wasn't intellectual. It was emotional. It was energetic. It was cellular. It was the kind of transformation that doesn't just change how you think, it changes how you exist. I first noticed this new identity in the way I responded to stress. An unexpected challenge came up, the kind of thing that would have completely overwhelmed me before this journey. And instead of spiraling into fear or panic, I felt calm. Not numb, not avoidant, but genuinely calm. I thought clearly. I remained centered. I trusted myself. I trusted the process. I trusted that abundance had already changed me too much for old reactions to feel natural anymore. This moment reminded me of something Oprah once said. True freedom is internal. And now I understood it. Freedom doesn't come from external circumstances improving. Freedom comes when your internal world becomes unshakable, when your identity is strong enough to remain steady even when life tests you. During this 9th stage, I also began seeing how deeply identity shapes action. Before this journey, I used to force myself to think positively, force myself to act confidently, force myself to take risks. It felt like effort, like discipline, like something I had to push myself into. But now, those same actions felt natural. They weren't effort anymore. They were instinct. They flowed from who I had become, not from who I was trying to be. This is something I've heard countless millionaires and leaders talk about. People like Jeff Bezos, Sara Blakely, Elon Musk, Richard Branson. They all say versions of the same thing. Success is the byproduct of identity. The person you believe yourself to be determines the choices you make, the risks you take, the opportunities you notice, the habits you build, the boundaries you set, the challenges you overcome. When your identity expands, your life expands with it. And when your identity stays small, your life stays small. During this stage, I began to understand why scarcity felt so heavy. Scarcity builds an identity based on protection. Abundance builds an identity based on expansion. Scarcity trains you to guard yourself. Abundance trains you to grow yourself. Scarcity teaches you to expect disappointment. Abundance teaches you to expect possibility. And once you taste the identity of expansion, going back to the identity of protection feels impossible. I realized something powerful one afternoon when I was journaling. I wrote a sentence without thinking, and when I saw the words on the page, I froze. I am no longer the person who needs to be saved from their own fears. It shook me, because it was true. For so long, I had waited for confidence to appear, waited for clarity to arrive, waited for something external to make me feel ready. But now, readiness wasn't something I waited for. It was something I generated. Confidence wasn't something I chased. It was something I embodied. I had become the version of myself that abundance had been waiting for all along. This identity shift affected every area of my life. My habits changed without effort. I took better care of my body, not because I felt obligated, but because I valued myself more. I became more disciplined, but it didn't feel like discipline. It felt like alignment. I became more selective with my attention, my time, my energy, not out of scarcity, but out of self-respect. Abundance had raised my standards for my own behavior. It also affected my ambitions. I started dreaming bigger without fear. Ideas that once felt unrealistic now felt possible. Not because the world had changed, but because I had changed. I started thinking long-term instead of short-term, trusting the process instead of rushing it. This reminded me of how Jeff Bezos makes decisions, not based on what feels safe now, but based on what aligns with the highest future vision. Abundance creates that kind of thinking. One of the most emotional moments of this stage came late at night, when I realized I no longer felt like I was becoming abundant. I felt like I was abundant. The old identity, the one rooted in fear, doubt, limitation, felt distant, almost like a memory of someone I used to be. Not someone I was trying to escape, but someone I had compassion for, someone I had outgrown. During this stage, I also realized how much abundance had changed my relationship with self-worth. I stopped negotiating with my value. I stopped apologizing for wanting more. I stopped shrinking to make others comfortable. I began showing up as someone who trusted their own worthiness deeply, and the world responded, not because people treated me differently, but because I treated myself differently. By the end of this 9th stage, one realization became absolutely clear. Abundance is not an outcome. It is an identity upgrade. And once that upgrade happens, nothing in your life remains unchanged. You stop needing external validation. You stop fearing the unknown. You stop sabotaging your own success. You stop living from survival mode. You begin living from creation mode. You become someone who leads their life instead of someone who merely survives it. And for the first time in my life, I felt like the person I had always known I could be. The person abundance had been guiding me toward all along. Topic 10. The moment you realize you'll never go back. As I reached the final stage of this 30-day journey, I felt something I had never felt before. A stillness, a clarity, a sense of inner alignment so strong that it was almost indescribable. It wasn't excitement, though I felt inspired. It wasn't pride, though I felt proud. It wasn't relief, though I felt lighter than ever. What I felt was something deeper, something that lives beneath words, a quiet certainty that my life would never be the same again. Not because everything outside of me had changed, but because everything inside of me had. When people talk about transformation, they often describe dramatic breakthroughs, the big moment, the sudden shift, the life-changing event. But the truth is, real transformation rarely happens in explosions. It happens in layers. It happens quietly, gradually, consistently, until one day you wake up and realize that the person you used to be isn't the person you are anymore. That's what abundance did to me. It didn't crash into my life like a storm. It unfolded like a sunrise, slowly at first, then suddenly bright, illuminating everything I had ignored, doubted, or underestimated within myself. The most profound realization of this entire journey was simple but life-altering. Abundance isn't something you attract. Abundance is something you become. And once you become abundant on the inside, the outside world has no choice but to rearrange itself accordingly. That was the beginning of my transformation. But the real breakthrough came at the end, when I understood something far deeper. Abundance is not just a mindset, not just a feeling, not just a practice. It is an identity, a frequency, a way of being. And once you embody it fully, even for a moment, you'll never again be able to live as the version of yourself who didn't know this truth. On the final day, I sat quietly and thought about who I had been before this journey began. The version of me who lived with constant worry, who questioned their worth, who played small, who planned from fear instead of vision. I felt compassion for that version of me, but I also realized something important. That person no longer existed. They had dissolved somewhere along the way, replaced by someone who no longer doubted their ability to create the life they desired. Someone who trusted themselves, someone who trusted life, someone who understood that the mind is not a passive observer of reality. It is the architect of it. One moment during this final stage captured the entire transformation perfectly. I was reflecting on the past month, flipping through my notes, reading the thoughts, fears, breakthroughs, and intentions I had documented. And suddenly, I came across something I had written on the very first day. "I hope this works." Those 4 words stopped me in my tracks. I stared at them for a long time, realizing how drastically my inner landscape had changed. I no longer hoped abundance would work. I knew it worked. I had lived it. I had felt it. I had seen it reshape my thoughts, my emotions, my relationships, my opportunities, my identity. I no longer wondered if abundance was real. I understood that abundance was the most natural state of my being. During this stage, I also realized how much abundance had transformed my relationship with the future. Before this journey, the future felt like a place filled with uncertainty, pressure, and potential disappointment. But now, the future felt expansive, full of possibility, full of paths that hadn't even become visible yet. I didn't need to know exactly how everything would unfold. I didn't need to control every outcome. I didn't need life to follow my timeline. Instead, I trusted that everything I had aligned with internally would manifest externally at the right moment, in the right way, with the right people. This shift reminded me of something Steve Jobs said. "You can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backward." And that's exactly what happened. Looking back at the past 30 days, I could see the dots, the moments of clarity, the moments of resistance, the synchronicities, the inner breakthroughs, the shifts in identity, all leading me to this exact point. They didn't make sense as they were happening, but in the hindsight of abundance, they formed a pattern so precise that it felt intentional. Life was never working against me. I simply wasn't aligned enough to see how it was working for me. As I continued reflecting, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude, not just for what abundance had given me, but for what it had taken away. It removed the weight of self-doubt. It dissolved the fears I carried for years. It erased the belief that I had to struggle to deserve good things. It took away the scarcity that had been living quietly inside me, shaping my decisions, limiting my vision, shrinking my potential. And in its place, it left clarity, confidence, possibility, trust, and a sense of inner authority I had never felt before. At this stage, I realized something that every self-made millionaire eventually discovers. The greatest wealth is emotional wealth. The wealth of knowing you can handle whatever comes. The wealth of trusting your path. The wealth of knowing you create your reality from the inside out. The wealth of knowing you are supported, guided, aligned, and capable of shaping the future you desire. This is the wealth that money alone can't buy. This is the wealth that abundance creates. The final days of the journey brought one last beautiful insight. Abundance is a decision, not a feeling, not a ritual, not a lucky break, a decision. A decision to stop rehearsing your fears and start rehearsing your future. A decision to stop believing the story of your limitations and start believing in the story of your potential. a decision to stop accepting the life that feels familiar and start creating the life that feels aligned. Somewhere along this journey, I made that decision, and everything changed. I began seeing myself as someone capable of greatness, not in an arrogant way, but in a grounded, deeply human way. I began trusting that every challenge had a purpose, every delay had a message, every setback had a lesson, and every blessing had a perfect timing. I began believing that nothing good was ever too good for me, because abundance isn't about deserving, it's about aligning. And once you align with abundance, life opens doors you didn't even know existed. On the final evening, I sat with a quiet realization that brought everything full circle. Abundance had not added something new to my life. It had removed everything that wasn't truly me. It stripped away the lies, the fears, the conditioning, the old identity I had mistaken for my truth. It revealed the version of me that had always been there, the version life had been waiting for. And that's when I understood the real transformation. The moment you experience abundance deeply, fully, sincerely, you can never go back to the person you were before. You may forget for a day, you may slip for a moment, but the truth of abundance will always call you home again. As this journey came to an end, I realized something powerful. The end was not an ending at all. It was a beginning. The beginning of a new relationship with myself. The beginning of a new identity. The beginning of a new story. The beginning of a life lived not from fear, but from expansion. Not from survival, but from creation. Not from scarcity, but from abundance. And that is the gift of these 30 days. The gift that lasts long after the challenge is over. Because once you discover abundance, once you embody abundance, once you become abundance, your entire life transforms into a mirror of who you now are, and you will never, ever again lower yourself to the person you used to be. If this journey spoke to your heart, if it opened something inside you, if it reminded you of who you truly are, then I invite you to continue this path with me. Subscribe to the channel so we can keep growing together. Like this video if it inspired you in any way. Comment below what part of this journey resonated the most with you. Your story matters. And share this video with someone who needs this message today. Let's spread abundance together.